That seems fair.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. It's 8:35 a.m. And this is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're taking up this morning H67 Act relating to household products containing hazardous substances. So good morning, Representative Dolan. We have a quorum, including with Senator Watson on the Zoom, and we'd love to get started and learn more about the bill. And the 60,000 foot view, Mr. O'Grady is going to give us a line by line read through, so we'll know it in detail in an hour or so. But for now, it'd be helpful to have a general introduction. And for people who are watching, they might wonder what are we doing and why.
Great. Well, for the record, I'm Representative Carrie Dolan from Waitsfield, representing Washington 2 District, which includes Warren, Waitsfield, Facein, Moretown, and Duxbury. It's great to be here to talk about H67, looking at household hazardous waste. And I encourage you to take a look at the findings, because I think they're helpful to understand the reason for why we're here today. Household hazardous waste are leftover household products that contain flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic ingredients. And these products are the most toxic or dangerous material in our municipal solid waste stream. And when federal law regulates these waste products, if generated by businesses, the same leftover hazardous substances are not regulated if they're generated in the home. So, and the disposal of household hazardous waste into our waste streams can happen unintentionally or intentionally. These materials are dangerous when they're put in the trash, on the ground, down the drain, into storm sewers, or stored improperly for the extended period of time. The household hazardous waste can injure sanitary workers if they're in the trash, and can contaminate septic tanks or wastewater treatment facilities if poured down the drains. They can degrade water quality, present hazards to children and pets if stored improperly. And state reports say that there's about 640 tons of household hazardous waste that are inappropriately disposed of in our landfill each year, which eventually contributes to millions of gallons a year of toxic leachate coming out of our one landfill and must be managed. So the purpose of this bill is to accomplish 4 outcomes: diverting the household hazardous waste from our one landfill, reducing the toxicity of our waste stream, reduce the health and safety risks to our sanitation workers and the public, and to reduce the municipal costs in managing these costs. So we're taking this up now because this bill has, a similar bill was passed out of the House last year, but this one, I think, three's a charm in addressing this, because I think this is actually the 3rd time it was introduced, but I'm hopeful this time, because I think it has made some, it's matured. And so the most recent one, I think, is helpful. It addresses the costs, and those costs that are borne by municipalities that are paid for through our property taxes are increasing. So the time is right now. They're dangerous, as I mentioned. They're flammable, corrosive, reactive, and toxic. So that threat to our waste streams and to our environment is substantial. And this bill is the product of the hard work of the administration's agencies, officials, the Vermont Product Stewardship Council, which are the municipal solid waste districts and alliances across the state, and is being introduced here in the Senate to you today. So the section 1 has the findings. Section 2 adds to the B of chapter in chapter 164 of Title IX to include definitions. It adds that section to the existing statute. It creates a new type of a term we use, extended producer responsibility in managing these projects. And you may know from seeing our other examples where we've used EPR. It's a special waste management recycling program that shifts the financial and management responsibility away, in this case, away from the municipality and taxpayer and to the manufacturer of the targeted hazardous products.
It does do that.
Yes.
That wasn't in one of the four
Yes.
that you mentioned, at least explicitly.
This is that approach.
This is that. Okay.
But the other benefits, I think, what I focused on my earlier comments, but the approach here is through an EPR system. And that kind of collaboration between the administration and the interested parties here, the municipal folks overseeing our the municipal management of our waste, have come together with this version of the bill. So if we were to take up this bill, interested parties would include folks like Jen Holiday and other members of the Vermont Product Stewardship Council, municipal solid waste management entities be called SWMEs, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Casella, Municipal Waste Association, perhaps the Fuel Dealer Association, Propane Gas Association of New England, the Vermont Retail and Grocers Association, and the Municipal Waste Association, VPIRG, Vermont Associated Industries of Vermont, the Agency of Agriculture, and the Agency of Natural Resources Division Director of the Solid Waste Division. So in sum, if this bill becomes law, I see it as a win-win. It's good for our one-lined landfill by diverting these toxics from improperly being disposed. It's good for municipalities by relieving them of some of the financial burden of managing and disposing of household hazardous waste that's currently on the property tax, on municipal tax. It's good for taxpayers by creating a financially sustainable household hazardous waste management system. It's good for Vermonters by offering a convenient, reliable, available, and safe way of disposing these wastes. Good for our waste haulers by reducing the risks in handling and transporting these materials, and good for the environment.
Thank you. So this started out as a companion bill to S44. Can you say something about how, so I know S44, but what happened to Wake 67 since introduction? There was obviously change, right? So can you just say something about how that initial view ended up evolving while the committee worked on it?
That's a good question. I'm not in that committee, but it came, it was,
Right.
but know that it passed, and I think the the Ledge Council, Council, Mr. O'Grady is here. We could talk about some of
I
those.
forgot you weren't in there this year. Okay.
Yes, but it moved pretty quickly, pretty swimmingly, if I may, pretty smoothly in going through the committee and onto the floor and passage as well.
Okay, great.
But he will be able to get into the details there.
Excellent. So thank you. Any questions for Representative Dolan?
Would you elaborate on the producer responsibility part?
And that's something that I know that Ledge Council, Mr. O'Grady will also talk
Okay.
to. But this is a way in which the producers of it will form entities that will then take the responsibility and cover the cost of returning these materials. So he'll get into the details regarding how that extended producer responsibility would apply in this case.
Thank you, Chair Bright, and I apologize for arriving late, Representative Dolan. I appreciate you taking the time to share this bill with us, and great work by the committee. So I've heard pretty loud and clear from constituents who are in the food systems space, so our co-ops in our area, who are very in favor of extended producer responsibility. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to if you heard from folks who are involved in the retail side of it. Perhaps you mentioned this and I missed it, but that group seems to be very intrigued on how they can they could be a part of the solution, but not then take on the responsibility of the person who's actually making the product they're retailing.
It's a good question. I think that's why I mentioned that they would be good at having them here to testimony, and it's perhaps something that that the Ledge Council, Mr. O'Grady, could address as well.
Great, thank you.
Great. Did you report this bill?
No, Representative Stebbins did.
Okay. All right, great. So thanks so much for coming, Senator McCormick.
Would you just, maybe not brand names, but just give examples of what we're actually talking about here? We're talking about, I presume, oven cleaners, toilet disinfectant. What else?
Yes.
All-purpose cleaners, spray cleaners.
Yes, as I mentioned, it's the type of product that's considered flammable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. And so it could be all of that above. And it's those leftover waste. A common one that people often talk about, and when people become more aware of the danger, is around the product of glyphosate, for example. You buy it off the shelf, you use it, you realize that it has some unintended impacts to the environment, and now they have a big jug of it. And typically they wait 6 months until their local household hazardous waste program is available for their district. And then this would be that kind of example where there would be an extended producer responsibility pertaining to that.
Does the bill do anything about encouraging the use of cleaner, less troublesome alternatives?
That's a very good question. This is about and how to manage these products. But the upside about this program is that there are safer alternatives.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Representative Dolan?
Thank you. Good luck.
For coming in.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll switch over to Mr. O'Grady to join us at the table. I'm going to share a note with the committee before we go out. So I mentioned this yesterday. So because it got left on my desk, I don't know if everyone else heard this. Dear members of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, thank you all for being so warm and welcoming to the Youth Lobby members last Friday. The students came back to me after sitting in on your committee meetings, so excited to share all that they had learned. Thank you all for all the hard work you do for our state. So that was from Vermont Conservation Voters and
The youth
working with. the
Yeah,
Youth
we
Lobby.
had them. It was nice.
Yeah. The game. So we don't get many. This is a rare piece of happy mail. Wanted to share it while we had the chance.
Thank you. That was nice.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. O'Grady.
Good morning.
Since there's two things. One was in terms of altitude. I'd love to do just a real bill walkthrough. So the
Like,
ground level.
all right, sure.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah, and the other thing is I think at the outset, S44 and this bill were they were identical.
They were relatively similar because of the different drafting deadlines,
Oh, right.
introduction deadlines.
Yeah.
There were some changes that were made in yours a little bit after they had to introduce
Okay.
their bill, but it's generally, I would say 90 to 95% the same.
Okay, great. All right, so
But it obviously changed in committee as well.
my sense was that the biggest area of change over time was constructing the producer responsibility program. Is that right?
Yeah, the components of it, I would say, both of the bills, that's 44 and 67, have the PRO requirement. So let's talk about extended producer responsibility. What is extended producer responsibility? It's a policy established by legislatures that requires manufacturers of certain products to assume the responsibility for managing what is referred to as the end of life of a product. So the ultimate disposition, whether it's recycling, reuse, or disposal of a certain type of product. Vermont has many EPR programs, including for mercury light bulbs, referred to as mercury lamps, electronic waste, batteries, paint, mercury thermostats, And technically, the bottle bill is an EPR program. So those are what the state currently does. What 67 proposes is to establish an extended producer responsibility program for covered household hazardous products. And I do think, as Representative Dolan referenced, the findings are instructive as to why this bill is being introduced. There are, and I'll just start walking through the bill. Page 1, the findings of the as-passed version that's on your website. There are thousands of products that are household products and that contain a hazardous substance. Vermont's hazardous waste rules establish specific requirements for the management of hazardous waste, including a prohibition on disposal of hazardous waste in landfills. The hazardous waste rules dictate the management of household hazardous waste by requiring municipal solid waste management entities, SWMEs, which is their right, to include provisions in the SWME management plan, solid waste management plan, for the management and diversion of household hazardous waste. And those SWMEs are required to hold at least 2 household hazardous waste collection events per year. Many SWMEs offer more than 2, and some have established permanent facilities. The household hazardous waste collection events and those facilities cost approximately $2.2 million a year to implement and manage. And those costs are subsequently passed on to Vermont residents through taxes, fees, or disposal charges.
Is that primarily like the cost of operating the rover, or this is the transfer station handling it, or the whole?
It's really the whole thing. It's you know, it obviously depends on whether or not you have a permanent facility or if you have an event. So if you have a permanent facility, you have to pay for that facility, its heating, its staffing, its operational cost, etc. And then the components of the permanent facility, the binning, the transport, the separation, etc. And with the events, it's the rover, and the rover has similar cost, staffing, separation, transport.
Can you remind us how many SWMEs we have?
So I don't,
45 or?
it's around that number in it, and so they're not all the quote unquote solid waste management districts. Some municipalities are their own, some have unions.
But they all have an obligation to manage.
All municipalities have an obligation to have a solid waste plan under state law and to meet the minimum requirements in the solid waste rules for a solid waste plan. There were at times what were referred to as the rogue towns that were not complying, but the rogue towns have been wrangled.
Okay. Right.
So on page 2, Representative Dolan noted that there were 647 tons or more per year of household hazardous waste being disposed of in landfills. We actually got a new number on that. The committee got a new number on that. It's actually 855 tons or more per year that are going into the landfills. There's general agreement among the SWMEs and A&R that additional collection and education is necessary to capture more HHW, but funding constraints are a current barrier to new collection sites and activities. And then household hazardous waste released into the environment can contaminate natural resources and pose a significant threat to the environment and public health. And then you get to the conclusion: to approve diversion of HHW from landfills, reduce financial burden on SWMEs and taxpayers, reduce the cost of the overall system, and lessen environmental and public health risk. State shall implement a program to require manufacturers of household products containing a hazardous substance to implement a stewardship organization to collect household products containing a hazardous substance free of charge to the public. So that then brings you to the actual substance. Page 3 of the as passed, section 2, a new chapter is being added to Title 10 in the area around the solid waste management provisions in Title 10. The definitions are important to this bill. The most, or one of the most important, is the definition of covered household hazardous product. It's a consumer product offered for retail sale that is contained in the receptacle that it was sold in. All right, so let's stop there.
Yeah.
So if it's empty, the container's empty and no longer has the product in it, you can throw the container away, right? Because it's not a household hazardous product anymore, because the product is no longer in the container.
And how does it address the notion that you could have residual product in there? Like
It's
de minimis?
generally determined that those products that are being sold in this way, when they're emptied and dried, there's very little residual for the purposes of management. Now, some people take some of these products and pour them into other containers, like turpentine. When you show up with that glass jar of turpentine, the SWME will take it, but it's not going to be part of the PRO because it's not in the container that it was.
But you don't know who's responsible.
Right, exactly.
Then it's not, the PRO is not obligated or
Responsible. It's not in a receptacle that's branded or otherwise meets the manufacturer's requirements for management. It's not part of the PRO.
So the container is off the hook because it doesn't have the stuff in it.
Right.
But the stuff is also off the hook because it's not in
Stuff
the
is
container.
outside of the program. Stuff is not outside the requirement to not be landfill disposed. So there's going to be a subset of these products that come into a SWME, to a disposal site, that don't get covered by the PRO, but are still will need to be managed by the solid waste management. The amount of that is fractional when compared to the types of products that are being returned.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Bray. So you kind of just answered the last bit of the question that I was hoping to ask. So you just said that it's a very small amount that these situations, or it's not as common. In my family, I don't know why we always seem to pour things into other things and keep them in the basement for I'm still there since before I was brought into this world. So I can understand that you probably could trace back who it is, but let's say there's a damaged label. I don't know if you get into that, or something has been in a basement for so long. Where's the obligation to, where does that come into?
So there's a definition in the bill called the orphan products. So say a manufacturer went out of business, but you still have that container, or the container the label is not readable, but it's still in the receptacle that it was sold in.
Yeah.
It becomes part of the PRO, part of the program, and then the participating manufacturers have to divide the orphan share equitably.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So for the stuff that's just in a mason jar, so it's not part of the PRO, that small fraction just lands on the shoulders of the SWME as an operating expense.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in sub 3, just above for covered entities, there's this exception of large quantity generators or small quantity generators, as those are defined. Can you just clue us in on what a large and small are and why they're?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they generally are generating for a large, I think it's thousands of pounds a year, and for small, it's like 440 pounds or more per year, but I will have to confirm those numbers for you.
Okay, thank you. And these are defined here because later on, either sort of de minimis generators or particularly large generators are going to handle differently than.
No,
than
it's
everything?
because the covered entities are afforded free collection. So under the plan that you'll see later on, there has to be free collection afforded to covered entities. So a large and small generator are already subject to management requirements of their waste. They are not going to be part of this program. They're not going to be free from their obligations by showing up at the PRO collection site with 440 pounds of hazardous waste. So let's talk about what is a covered household hazardous product. It's generally something that's been identified in A&R's hazardous waste rules as a hazardous waste. And Representative Dolan noted the characteristics: corrosive, ignitable, etc. And those are the products that are going to be covered. You may hear, oh, well, how does the manufacturer know that they're covered? Manufacturers of these products are already subject to multiple federal and state rules, including things like the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act. If you're going to be moving something that's characterized as a hazardous waste, you already know it's a hazardous waste. Another component that is going to be part of the covered household hazardous products are gas cylinders. There's a definition of gas cylinders that is on page, it starts on page 4 and goes on to page 5. 2 components. It's any non-refillable gas cylinder. So your propane tank is refillable. It's any non-refillable up to a water capacity of 50 pounds. So your smoke, your fire extinguisher, your carbon dioxide, or your seltzers, etc. Those things wind up in household hazardous waste. They wind up at your transfer facilities, and they can blow up. And they have. And the SWMEs would really like to get them out of the waste stream. Now, your propane tanks are already subject to a program of collection and reuse and replacement. And so they are not part of this program.
Aerosols?
Aerosol is going to be part of, it's just going to be in the hazardous waste.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get the propane bottles that go on a tabletop backyard grill.
So that's the second category. And those are they are refillable cylinders containing of a capacity of 1 pound or less.
See, they treat it as refillable, but that doesn't happen.
They are not refillable.
Yeah, no one takes them back.
Right, well, they are refillable. You can fill them technically, but nobody takes them back.
No one takes them back.
So that's on page 5, subdivision 5A2. They are going to be part of this program.
Okay, and my little ones, when I go hiking, same thing, little propane. That's not the bottle, it's just a little.
Your little propane tank, if it's refillable, is going to be part of this program.
Again, no one actually takes it back and refills it, but physically it could be refilled.
It could be.
Okay,
And the committee in the House is pretty strongly in favor of the refillable, the small refillable ones, because people don't refill them. People just throw them away.
So like a torch, small torch, that those little tanks.
I mean, I think the Coleman
Yeah.
camping,
uh-huh.
those are the most common ones that people are aware of. So let's talk about what is not a consumer household hazardous product, and that's on page 4. It is not any of the programs products that are already covered by EPR programs. So it's not a primary battery, It's not a mercury lamp. It's not a mercury thermostat. It's not paint. It's not an electronic waste to cover electronic device. It's not a pharmaceutical drug, because pharmaceutical drugs have take backs. It's not citronella candles, because it's been determined that once used, that they are not an issue in the waste stream. Not flea and tick collars, it's the same issue that once that they've been used, that they're no longer an issue. And it's not pesticides. Representative Dolan gave you an example of the product of one carrying or containing glyphosate.
Yeah.
It is not pesticides. It is not going to be a product containing glyphosate. It is a pesticide. That's because the Agency of Agriculture already runs a program for the collection of waste pesticides.
Okay.
Now, the SWMMEs have been critical of that program in the past. The agency has committed to improving that program, working with SWMMEs and providing SWMMEs more funding for the management of waste pesticides.
So when consumers show up at the transfer station with a jug of glyphosate or half of one and drop it off, is SWMME going to say, no, you can't leave that with us because we're not? It's not
And we'll get to how this program is going to work, and it does address Senator White's question about how retailers are going to be involved a little bit later on, but they will take it. They're just going to have to separate it in management under the Agency of Ag collection program instead of this PRO collection program.
This list of what is not included, I take it that in some cases, it's not included because it doesn't rise to that level of toxicity. But there are other things on the list that I'm presuming they're not included because they're already covered someplace else.
Yes, I would say subdivisions B1 through 11, or no, 1 through 6 are all already covered somewhere else. Then subdivisions 7 and 8 are been deemed not to be an issue. Subdivision 9 is because there's already a program run by the Agency of Agriculture. Subdivision 10, that that's basically accepting cosmetics, because cosmetics may have hazardous materials in them. And it's just was deemed to be just something that the agency thought was too complicated, and especially considering all the federal requirements for cosmetics.
Did Senator Lyons have a bill that addresses the ingredients allowed in cosmetics?
PFAS.
PFAS like cosmetics.
So that's what's not in.
Question from Senator Watson.
Thank you. Sorry, it's a little loud over here, but a question about the primary battery. What is meant by a primary battery?
So there's a definition in statute of a primary battery. Let me find, I can find it for you. It is not all batteries. It is a subset of all batteries. It's those batteries that are most easily recyclable effectively. And does not include, let me just find it. I don't want to misspeak.
Well, and one of the reasons I ask is because, depending on the application, I mean, it could be alkaline, it could be lithium, and anyway, I guess I'm wondering about defining the chemical type.
So that, here, I'll give you the definition of primary battery, and then I'm going to talk to you about the landfill disposal provision for batteries. So a primary battery is a non-rechargeable battery weighing 2 kilograms or less, and it includes alkaline, carbon, zinc, and lithium metal batteries. It shall not mean a battery intended for industrial business to business. It shall not mean a battery that is sold in a computer monitor, computer peripheral, television, etc. Shall not mean a battery that is not easily removable or is not intended to be removed from a consumer product. It is not a battery that's sold in a medical device. So that's what a primary battery is. It's basically non-rechargeable alkaline carbon, zinc, and lithium metal batteries.
And what's the citation for where this is spelled out?
This is 10 VSA 7581 subdivision 10.
Thank you.
So there is a program for the collection of primary batteries. And you would think that with most of our EPR programs, that once there's an EPR program, there's also a landfill disposal ban. That is not the case for all of those batteries I just read to you. So under the landfill disposal ban, lead acid batteries are prohibited. Nickel cadmium batteries are prohibited. And that's it.
Okay.
This committee actually passed a prohibition on all landfill disposal of batteries 2 or 3 years ago, but it didn't pass. And now it didn't pass the House, and that was at the request of the agency. But the agency hasn't been requesting that since then.
Okay, I was gonna say, I remember expanding the battery thing, other than the one that I remember being accepted was something like batteries for medical device, or didn't we
Yeah.
do something we did, but we
Yeah,
did
that-
hearing aid batteries.
Right. There was an advocate for hearing aid batteries that came in that somehow got some provision out of it. I can't remember.
Okay, all right, so something maybe to revisit, maybe the second or third time will be the charm. All right, thank you.
So I'm not sure if that answers Senator Watson's question or not.
Looks like yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, moving on page 5. This program is for manufacturers of the product. So manufacturers are, there's various different ways to define them, and this definition includes pretty much every variant. So it's actually the person that manufactured the covered household hazardous product under its own brand or label and sells it in the state. It's the person that sells in the state under its own brand or label a covered household hazardous product produced by another supplier. It's a person that owns a brand that it licenses to another person for use on a covered household hazardous product sold in the state. It is somebody who imports into the US a covered household hazardous product when the person that manufactured it does not have a US presence. And it's somebody that manufactures a covered household hazardous product for sale in the state without affixing a brand name.
That's the
And then it's somebody who assumes the responsibilities of any of those subdivisions that I just listed. And that is what will be called a stewardship organization.
Okay, so comprehensive. What is an example of 5? Page 6 there, sub 5.
It's basically the generic product. And so you have these things called private label. And so they can make a private label that doesn't have a brand on it. It'll just say toilet cleaner. So,
This is like the Dollar Tree version.
well, it's theirs to avoid the people who want to circumvent this program doing something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Every way you could get into Vermont is covered.
Yes. And that is generally the definition that's used in all of the EPR programs, so you don't allow circumvention. For page 6, there is a de minimis exception of a person manufactures, sells, license, or imports less than $5,000 for covered household hazardous product in every state in a year. They are exempt, but they have to register with the secretary. See that definition of orphan covered product on page 6. I won't go through, we already talked about it. Then the next important definition is page 7, line 12, the stewardship organization. It's the legal entity that has developed a system, method, or other mechanism that assumes the responsibilities, obligations, and liabilities of the multiple manufacturers of covered household hazardous products. And then you get to the operable parts of the chapter, page 7. EPR programs work by having a sale prohibition. You can't sell your product in the state unless you meet the requirements of that EPR program. And so that's what every one of these programs starts off with. And so beginning July 1, 2025, the manufacturer of a covered household hazard product shall not sell, offer for sale, or deliver to a retailer for subsequent sale a covered household product unless all the following have been met. They're participating in a stewardship organization, implementing an approved plan. They identify all of the manufacturers brands, and the products that are covered by the stewardship organization, and they list all of them on a website that's publicly available. They submit an annual report as required by the law. They conduct an audit of their program as required by the law. And that's what they have to do. But the important one is page 8, subdivision 1. They have to implement a plan, and we're going to go through the plan requirements in a minute. Stewardship organizations also have to be registered. So on page 8, sub D, beginning July 1, 2024, and annually thereafter, they have to file a registration form with A&R. The registration form has to include a list of the manufacturers, a list of the brands, a list of the products. You'll see the listing requirement 3 times in this bill. They have to have a contact information for a person at the stewardship organization. They need to describe how they are qualified as a stewardship organization, including how they are not going to prevent other manufacturers from participating in the stewardship organization. In the past, you've regulated industries where the manufacturers don't get along with each other. They don't want to work together. And therefore, sometimes they set up unreasonable barriers to some manufacturers entering their PRO, their stewardship organization. This bill and all of the other EPR programs say they can't do that. And A&R gets to determine whether or not they're imposing unreasonable barriers to participation. Some of these people just don't like each other. And so you have to account for that.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the bill would sweep in a lot of different, very different products, different sorts of manufacturers. Wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as kin.
Right. Okay. And then the stewardship organization has to give a contact information for another manufacturer to contact so that they can participate. Then you get to page 9, 7183. These are the collection plan requirements. This is the heart of any EPR program, what they are required to do, what the stewardship organization must do in order to collect, manage, and ultimately dispose or recycle the product. Key part of this program is that sub A, the bill directs any manufacturer to participate in a stewardship organization and submit one collection plan for all manufacturers. There has to be one collection plan. There might be 2 stewardship organizations. Remember, if they don't get along with each other and they don't want to play in the sandbox together, they don't have to under this bill. But they all have to have the same plan.
So is the idea that the plan will be comprehensive, and then underneath it as an umbrella, there will be different stewardship organizations.
Right, and that's partly because of the scope of this. You might have manufacturers of similar products that say, hey, we want to work together because we can work with our sales data and we can manage our costs and our disposition of these products in a certain way different from that manufacturer of that product. Let them form their own stewardship organization, but they have to have the same basic plan.
And okay, thank you. And it's ANR that reviews and certifies.
A&R has to review and approve each stewardship organization and has to review the plan. And so let's get to the minimums that are in the plan. So again, they got to list all their participants, manufacturers, brands, and products, and have to have that on a website for public review. Then page 10, subdivision B2, they have to provide free statewide collection of covered household hazardous products to covered entities. So generally the public, small businesses, but not large or small generators of hazardous waste. They have to,
Sorry, I'm slowly thinking back to the one plan. Who writes the one plan if it has multiple stewardship organizations under it?
they're gonna have to coordinate. The way that, say, the battery manufacturers have to coordinate to come up with a plan. Even though that's the industry where they most did not like each other. They got together and they finally like, all right, fine, let's just do it.
Thank you.
So as part of free statewide collection, the stewardship organization shall accept all covered household hazardous products collected from a covered entity and shall not refuse the collection of a covered household hazardous product, including orphan covered household products, or based on the manufacturer unless specifically exempt from the requirement. Collection program shall also provide for the payment of collection processing and the end of life management of the covered household hazardous product. Those costs include facility costs, equipment, labor, supplies, maintenance, event costs, and event contractor costs, setup fees, environmental service fees, insurance fees, and shipping containers and materials. That's what they're going to pay for. Now, let's talk about the convenience requirement. So in many EPR programs, the focus is on where the public, the covered entity, can return the product so that it becomes part of the PRO. Many of those other programs, we're dealing with products that aren't as hazardous as these products. And so the concept is you don't, and many of the other EPR programs allow a retailer to opt in or to be a collection site. So Home Depot sells batteries, they can opt in to be a battery collection site. Your paint store sells paint, they can opt in to be a collection site for paint. There's no opt-in here for retailers. These products, especially in their waste form, can create significant environmental and health issues if they're not managed correctly. So the existing system is going to be the opportunity for convenience of collection. And the existing municipal household hazardous waste collection programs can opt in. So retailers are not part of this for collection. Your existing SWMEs and municipal collection points are because of the nature of these products.
Okay, and they're obligated under law to manage those products or have it.
The municipality can opt in. The municipality is still going to have a component of its plan that says that they have to manage household hazardous waste in a way that separates it from the landfill.
Yeah.
But say the municipality is in a union and the town that over says we're going to be the one that's going to do the household hazardous waste then that municipality can say, we're gonna opt out of some collection program, you just need to go to the town over there. There is a requirement that the plan shall make efforts to site points of collection equitably across all regions of the state to allow for convenient and reasonable access. That was an amendment from Ways and Means. It might be difficult to do that considering that the program is using the existing infrastructure. If A&R is going to diligently enforce that, the PRO is probably going to have to establish new collection areas because, you know, there's going to be some tension there, I think, especially in rural areas about whether or not it's the collection is equitably cited across the state.
Right. Sounds like the bottle bill, we had conversations about how far you would have to go in order to be able to turn.
Right. Those conversations again, I'm sure. So that's convenience. Then you move on to public education and outreach. Every one of these plans, PPR plans, needs to have education and outreach to inform the public of the opportunity for collection, where collection is provided. And this plan also includes provisions for educational materials for diverse ethnic populations. And then there has to be that website again that lists all the products and the collection locations. And you'll see, and the special handling considerations, page 12, subdivision C. Page 12, subdivision 5, there needs to be compliance with environmental standards and potentially special handling standards that are established by A&R. The collection plan has to describe how the products will be managed in the most environmentally and economically sound manner. Under the plan, there are performance goals on page 13, subdivision 7. So the performance goal for household hazardous products is determined by the total number of participants at collection events and facilities during a program year divided by the total number of households in the state. So because people don't recycle or bring these products in for collection on a regular basis, the Senator White noted you keep a lot of them at the basement, like most people do, until an opportune time.
Archival turpentine.
Right. It's not about what's brought back, like the number of beverage containers that are brought back. It's about how many people are interfacing with the system each year compared to the total number of households in the state.
Why is that?
Because it's an easier way to manage or measure really how successful this program is. It's how many people are using it rather than how much is being collected. But at the same time, you'll see later on, there are reports on how much is collected. And the performance goal is set originally at 5% of the households in the state, with the requirement that it has to increase at least 1% per year during the lifetime of the plan.
Starts at 5%.
Sorry, page 13, subdivision B, it starts at 5%, provided that the participation rate shall increase by 1% for every year of the plan. After initial approval, search organization proposes a new performance goal. Secretary has to approve that. Secretary uses the results of the waste composition study and other relevant factors like the report of the PRO search organization to determine what the appropriate participation rate should be.
Can you say a little bit about, it sounds like a modest figure, because the bottle bill aims for 80%, right?
Right. That's 80% of the containers, right? Not 80% of the households.
So
This is about the households and how many are interfacing with this program every year. SWMEs are the ones that propose this, saying that this is what they think is appropriate for this type of a program, considering the variability of interface with the program from year to year.
Does mean that you have like 90, takes 95 years to get 100% participation. Seems like a long timeline.
Right, right. I mean, but you theoretically are going to have, there's what, 7 people in the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people in the room right now. You're going to go this year. I'm going to go next year. You're going to go the year after that. Is that 100% or 50%? You know, and we've all used the system when we needed to. We're just not using it every year.
There, Watson.
Yeah, thank you. That it's an interesting question, I guess, about the uptake rate. You know, I guess I think about the. So I mean, does it's not starting from like products that are sold after a certain date, or maybe it is, and I've missed it, but you know, because some people have these products in their basements already, and so would that count as a part of the 5% goal? I mean, it's kind of hard to estimate how much is out there still. Maybe we do know, because it's being, maybe somebody's keeping track of that, the rates at which it's showing up in municipal hazardous waste collection days or whatever. But I guess, yeah, so that's my question, is like, what about the stuff that's already out there?
Well, the stuff that is already out there can be collected and managed, even if the manufacturer is no longer in business, because that's an working product. But you kind of answered your own question. The state doesn't have the sales information for the products prior to the effective date of this bill. So it can't say, oh, this percentage of the products prior to the effective date of this bill were collected or were not. Going into the future, in the report back from the PRO, there is going to be sales data that is reported. And ultimately, going into the future, you might be able to determine if it's better to have a participation rate based on what is collected versus what is sold. But right now, you don't have that. And there's a universe of products that will be subject to this that you don't have any information on their sales data about, but you want them to be part of the program. So you need to measure participation different from what is sold and what is collected, at least initially for this program.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're on page 14, subdivision 8. The plan has to describe how the stewardship organization will fund the implementation of the collection plan, including costs for education, outreach, processing, and end-of-life management. Again, the collection costs include facility costs, equipment, labor, supplies, maintenance, events. It's a little bit of bootstrapping since it's already in the convenience requirement. But this is what the SWMEs, since they're going to be part of this program, integral part of this program as collection sites, they need this to be clear what they will be paid. The collection plan is 5 years. The stewardship organization has to implement that collection plan on or before July 1, 2025. Then you get to the requirements on page 157184 of the stewardship organizations. They've got to meet the requirements the manufacturer needs to meet the requirements by participating in a stewardship organization that assumes its responsibilities. Stewardship organization has to commit to assuming the responsibilities of manufacturers. They cannot create those unreasonable barriers for participation, and they've got to maintain that website that's publicly available and list all the brands and products. Then there's the annual report, beginning September 1, 2026, and annually thereafter, they report to A&R. They describe their collection program. They report the volume or weight by hazard category that's collected each year and how they've been disposed of. They also identify the facility where it was collected and the number of covered entities participating at each collection facility. They provide the name and address of all the recycling and disposal facilities where the household hazardous products that are collected are delivered, deposited. Senator Watson on subdivision 4, they report the weight or volume by hazard category of covered household products sold in the state in the previous calendar year by a manufacturer participating in the stewardship organization. That sales data is going to be exempt from Public Records Act inspection because it is confidential business information, but it will be available to A&R. The report shall compare the collection plan's participation rate and public awareness to the actual their goal in the plan, they'll compare the actual participation with the plan's goal participation rate and how they may improve it if they're not meeting it. They shall describe the methods used to reduce, reuse, collect, transfer, recycle, and process. They shall report the cost of a program, and then they will describe and evaluate the success of the education and outreach materials. And then last, they will recommend any changes to the program. And beginning September 1, 2030, every 5 years, there's a requirement that the stewardship organization hire an independent auditor to audit the plan and its operation, to look at both its effectiveness in collecting and disposing of products and also its cost effectiveness, and compare it to collection programs for covered household hazardous products in other jurisdictions. So there are no other US jurisdictions that are doing this, but there are Canadian jurisdictions that are. And EPR is also like a snowball rolling down a hill. Once it starts in one state, it collects other states.
Exciting.
Page 18, 71, 86. So generally, I think you all know that when groups of businesses get together and start talking about how they're going to manage a product together, that can be considered illegal collusion. And so what this section does is it provides those manufacturers with immunity from liability under state antitrust laws for the purposes of implementing the approved collection plan. You will see on page 18 sub B that immunity from liability does not apply to an agreement among the producers, manufacturers, retailers, or wholesalers, or stewardship organizations affecting the price of the product or the geographic area or distribution of sale. Federal antitrust laws still apply because the state can't exempt someone from federal law, but the feds have not been pursuing antitrust liability against EPR programs.
If they wanted to, they could.
I mean, technically, they're going to have to show some effect on price and or distribution of a product. I think it would be hard for them to do that, considering state oversight of these plans. Page 19, 71, 87, you get A&R's responsibilities. They review and approve collection plans. Plans have to meet all the requirements that we already discussed, but there's criteria for the plan approval. It has to meet those requirements. It has to provide adequate notice to the public and opportunities about the opportunities for collection. It has to ensure the collection of covered household hazardous products in an environmentally sound fashion. has to promote the collection and disposal of household hazardous products, and it has to be reasonably expected to meet its performance goals. And if the manufacturer or stewardship organization fails to submit a plan that's acceptable, A&R can modify the submitted plan to make it conform to the requirements of the chapter.
Is that true for our other EPR program?
Yeah, generally, yes. You know, when it varies a little bit from one program to another. Sometimes A&R can just modify the plan. Sometimes the A&R tells them they have to modify the plan and resubmit. You'll see in the bottle bill, when the bottle bill comes over, A&R can say, no, we disapprove your plan. We're gonna adopt our own plan.
Right.
So there's different ways to do it.
So the bill does not, if I'm reading it correctly, does not actually say what they have to do with the stuff. The Secretary of A&R will deal with the details.
Right, so this is hazardous waste. And so hazardous waste has to be managed in specific manners according to both federal and state law. There aren't that many people that are engaged in the business of managing hazardous waste. So there are a ton of options for the stewardship organization in their management and disposition of these products. It will depend partly on the type of products. So there are some products that you can recycle, but most of these products are going to be handled by 5 or 6 different business entities, and going to those collection facilities that those businesses operate.
It's already in law that it can't be allowed to find its way back into the environment.
It's not supposed to. It does, because people throw things in their trash can that are not supposed to go into their trash can.
But what's collected has to be handled
What's collected.
in such a way that it doesn't.
Yes. Yeah. Once it's collected, it has to be handled according to federal and state law, and has to be disposed of properly. And part of the report is that the stewardship organization has to identify where these products were disposed of and managed.
Are you talking about a CERCLA? I'm trying to remember. From years ago in school, is this a CERCLA that is ultimately our protection?
CERCLA relates to when property has been contaminated by hazardous materials release. And then there is liability for the owner of the land, the operator of the facility, the person that arranged for the transport of the material there, and or the transporter. And it's doing several liability. You just need one of them to be a viable entity.
I'm trying to remember, it was a law school exercise. No person shall knowingly introduce contaminated or a toxic substance.
Knowingly is not a part of CERCLA.
Is that RCRA? It's one of those. They had the whole exercise. What does a person have to know?
So
They have to know
the
now?
knowingly component comes into CERCLA for purposes of criminal liability.
Yeah.
So that's where criminal liability attaches in CERCLA, when you knowingly or intentionally release material.
Can you spell out for people? the
Yes.
CERCLA and
Sorry.
Yes,
RCRA?
thank you. You know this.
So CERCLA is a comprehensive environmental compensation. Comprehensive environmental remediation, compensation, and liability.
It's CERCLA. That's all I know.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And it's also referred to as Superfund.
Oh.
Superfund isn't actually a super fund anymore, but I won't go into those details.
What was the R one you had said?
RCRA.
What is RCRA?
Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So CERCLA is about managing hazardous material, property contaminated by hazardous material releases. RCRA is the hazardous material and sometimes solid waste material federal law. And if there are others.
I'll talk. Get my acronyms.
So one focuses on like how you ended up with brownfield, and the other one
Right.
focused on the materials, how they should be appropriately handled to begin with.
Don't call it a brownfield, because brownfields is kind of like
Lay term.
it kind of lays between the two. A Superfund site can turn into a brownfield, but a brownfield doesn't have to be a Superfund site.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
Senator White.
thank you, Chair Bray. So just so I fully understand, I'm going to use an example. So we spoke with Representative Christy Morris, who has spent some time on this topic, and he noted that there is a Superfund site in Springfield that is a former landfill. So by this definition, it is a brownfield, but it is also a Superfund site, and it is got both of those things covering it, both of those pieces, because it was a location that had contamination and was a location accepting contaminated material.
No, so to be a Superfund site, you have to be listed on something called surplus. And certain designation, you're
eligible.
well, you become either part of the federal remediation or the state remediation program. And so a brownfield doesn't necessarily need to be on surface, but it can be, the property can be contaminated in such a way that it can't be readily developed without remedial action.
Okay, and the threshold for when it is developable or like can be used for another purpose is dependent on the state or federal, like thumbs up to that?
Yeah, it depends on how it's contaminated. Some sites cannot be redeveloped.
And it seems like that's what's happening in Springfield, because there, as he described it, they're paying around $180,000 a year as a municipality to continue the remediation, but the understanding is they will never, for the most part, remediate.
Right, what they're probably paying for is the operation and management of the remedial
Yeah.
activity. You need to do things like monitor. You need
Yes.
to do things like air test for some contaminants. You need to often, in some places, manage the soil, manage the groundwater. So it depends on the material that contaminated the property, how badly it's contaminated and what you can do with it. I worked for a company once where they had run a light bulb manufacturer in plant, and they shipped it all their manufacturing out of state or to another state, and they sold the building for redevelopment as lofts.
That's great for us.
When they turned the heat on, when the lofts were all done, mercury started seeping out of the exposed brick walls that they had left there for aesthetic effect. They had to buy back the building, and they basically just left it enclosed and cold until they could figure out how to manage it. It ultimately was destroyed and became a brownfield site and redeveloped, but it was a long, torturous process.
Okay, thank you.
So just,
Yes, the only thing I'm thinking is we should aim to wrap up in about 10 minutes.
I want to tie up what we were talking about, just to make sure I've got it right. The bill requires manufacturers to take their toxic stuff.
It requires the stewardship organization which all manufacturers need to participate in. One requires that stewardship organization to take any manufacturing product.
Yes, okay, but to take, but they're all manufacturers of that product, even under different brand names.
Whatever household hazardous product, yes.
Okay. The bill does not get into detail on what they have to do with it once they've got it, because that's already covered by other existing
There's
laws.
already laws for how to properly manage and dispose of hazardous waste. I think let's skip ahead. Well, page 21 is like inside baseball. 7188 other disposal programs. There's this form of constitutional law called flow control, and generally you cannot discriminate against the flow of solid waste and commerce. So you can't say, Burlington can't say we're not going to allow any of our solid waste to be disposed of in plastic. Because that's something across the state lines. And basically the courts have said municipalities can't do that. However, a few years ago, probably more than a few years ago now, the Supreme Court said if the municipality owns and controls their landfill, then they can dictate that their waste must be disposed of in their landfill because they have a legitimate interest in the management of that waste for the purposes of the funding and performance of the landfill facility that they own.
But at this point, there are no municipal landfills in Vermont, is that correct? Operating.
Well, technically, the Northeast Kingdom Solid Waste Management District has the landfill as part of it. So they can't dictate that waste goes to Coventry, or Burlington can't say that all these household hazardous products need to go to its, or South Burlington, I can't say, has to go to our permanent facility, and then we're gonna take possession of them and manage them because we can make a profit off of it. That undermines the entire effectiveness of this program. If municipal solid waste management entities opt out and start managing it on their own, then you have holes in the system. So basically, this section says that despite the Supreme Court saying municipalities can manage their own if they have a facility for purposes of that, this said no, you can't for the purposes of this program. Page 21, 7189, A&R will have general rulemaking authority to implement the requirements of the chapter. Page 21, section 3, going on to page 22. Guys haven't seen a permit fee in a long time because there hasn't been a fee bill, but permit fees are supposed to pay for the state's cost in implementing and administering a program. So there's no fee proposed in this bill, but there is a requirement that on January 15, 2024, and I'll report back to you with the proposed registration fee by stewardship organizations to fulfill the agency's cost and oversee the program. So that's no fee, but a report on a recommended fee. Page 22, Sec 4, that's the landfill disposal ban beginning July 1, 2025. Covered household hazardous products will be banned from landfill disposal. Section 5 is the public notice process that A&R will follow in the noticing of the proposed household hazardous waste collection plan. Section 6.
The question on type 3. Type 3 is, I'm trying to remember, I think there are just 3 types or there's 5
There's
types.
5 types.
Yeah, and 3 is sort of like a middling level of
Yeah.
public notice and comment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Page 24 is A&R's enforcement authority. You all recall that A&R doesn't put its enforcement authority in each individual chapter in law. It has its own one chapter of law for enforcement that applies to all its programs. So this is a new chapter that's being listed under the A&R applicability section for enforcement. Similarly, section 7 on page 24, that's adding A&R's, this program to A&R's appeal authority. Someone has an issue with an act or decision of the secretary under this new program. This is how they appeal. And then the act takes effect on passage, but the operable dates are built into the substance of the program.
Great. 3 minutes of 10. Super concise. Full swap. Any other committee questions? There, what?
I have no questions, but I do feel like I need to understand the implications of this bill in a way that more senior members of the committee have probably, it's natural to them. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations on places to look to try to familiarize myself further.
So I would recommend that you bring in some of the witnesses from the House.
Yeah.
I'd bring in Matt Chapman, he's the head of the solid waste division at A&R. Either John Leddy or Jen Holiday from the solid waste management districts. John's from Northwest and Jen is from Chittenden. You can bring in some of the manufacturers. They in the House proposed that they basically propose the alternative of the municipalities just keep doing what they're doing and the manufacturers will pay them. But the committee thought that this was a better way forward to shift the responsibility from the municipalities to the PRO, search organization.
Have
A list.
the witness list from.
Yeah, it's a pretty, I wouldn't say the longest list I've ever seen, but it's pretty long.
Okay. Right, great. So this is a pretty solid teeing up of this bill, that I think based on discussions I had with Chair Sheldon, before we even had, finished bill on either side, that it was something we would, because it got partway, I think 3 sessions running, that it was a priority to get this one over the finish line this year. But we'll have a committee priorities discussion and weave this into the batting order. Okay, great. Any other questions for Mr. O'Grady? Thank you very much.
Sure, I'll see you later.
I'm sure we'll end up pointing to again. On 115, can you think about that, what we were talking about, namely, I was thinking, Michael, before we get started, to look at possible language around, because there's one, if he could help us or help me better understand the legal ambiguity that's there to be resolved, and how might we substitute in something into 115 that would charge the right people with addressing that issue and bringing a recommendation back to the legislature for next, by end of the year, something like that, December 1.
So the agency of ag, representatives of municipal stormwater entities, management entities. Probably you want DEC involved as well.
Right?
So those would probably be
The three stakeholders that don't quite see it all the same way.
so you could have DEC after consultation with ag and the representatives of municipal stormwater management entities report back to you on a way to propose method of assessing property subject to the RAP's stormwater fee or stormwater, including potential offsets for activities conducted on farms.
That sounds about right. I mean, so, we didn't schedule this, but just so that McCormick and Senator White you hear, so the construct is if you're already doing things that help. There's a credit system, I think, for non-farm properties. If you're doing something that helps reduce, impact on the MS4, things construct may apply to, farm properties. But how to do it would be the subject of that report. It would also help us get at the whole point of the costs. Anyway, that's an idea. Like how, no, not
No.
this. No, this is, sorry. This is
Okay.
S115.
That's what I thought. I was like, I'm very
It's
confused.
just that since we had just talked about 115 yesterday,
Yes,
on my mind, and we're talking about getting more witnesses. Just thinking about, well, what's a pathway out of this? It doesn't just say an absolute no, but could help us resolve the ambiguity.
Thank you, Chair Bright.
So the exemption would take place now. We get a report and reconsider an exemption next time, next session. I don't know where the committee's land, but at least we'd have a recommendation from the interested parties.
I would love to see language on that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay,
Thank
will
you,
do.
Mr. Reedy. Okay.
So we've got a drop dead date.
Okay.
In 48 hours, we've got a drop dead moment.
Yeah.
So we gotta.
Right, okay. So with that, we'll take a break till